Welcome to Porch Play Chats, sponsored by the American Association for Promoting the Child's Right to Play, or more affectionately termed IPA-USA. IPA-USA is it's like the USA affiliate or the USA group of the International Play Association. And so, as a part of our focus to promote play, we have implemented these Porch Play Chats, and they're just conversations about a variety of topics with folks who are just as passionate about play as we are. And so today on the porch with me, I'm Deb Lawrence, the president of IPA USA, and on the porch with me is Lisa Murphy. Good morning, Lisa.
Hello. Good morning.
Lisa's one of our board members, and those of you who know Lisa know what an advocate for play she is. And also with us is Corliss Outley. And Corliss, we're so happy to have you. Corliss is a professor at Clemson University, and I think one of the most exciting, though Corliss is exciting anyway, but one of the things that she's just implemented based on sort of the time that we live in at the moment is a collaboratory, which is like a open walls safe place to talk about race, ethnicity, youth, and social equity. Boy, is that a topic that we need.
And I have to give you a nod. That is a very ingenious blending of collaboration and laboratory. I've never heard it before, and I'm probably going to steal it. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
And that is okay. And I'll give you sources on that, on the best way to actually develop a collaboratory in your community.
That is, I've never heard the term before, Corliss,
Yeah,
so we appreciate it. So Corliss is one of the 3 presenters in a series. And so this is the 3rd in the series. So hopefully you've watched the first 2. And the series, and if not, you can go back to YouTube and watch them.
Exactly.
The series is Play, Childhood, and Race. And today, Corliss's 3rd title of the series is Now What Do We Do? How should we move forward in this place that we find ourselves in? And so Corliss, can you tell us a little bit more about what your thinking is on how we should move forward?
Right. But first, let me go ahead and say thank you to my co-presenters from the 1st and the 2nd series, Dr. Pinckney and Dr. Bryan. They did an amazing overview of the status of play for Black Americans here in the U.S., particularly our youth, and the fact that regardless of how you may see play, we know play is important for the development of children and youth. But the fact that we have young Americans, particularly Black youth, that are losing their childhood in lots of ways because they don't have the ability to play. And at the same time, they're being dehumanized when they are playing in terms of interactions with police, interactions with the new term Karens, who are saying that they don't belong in certain spaces. And so I wanted to acknowledge them first, but also give a little background of what we need to do. We need to acknowledge that the history of the U.S. is rooted in a long-standing ideology around systemic inequities. It's been set up there for a reason. It's been allowed to have privilege for certain groups, as well as dominance for certain groups over others. And we need to first acknowledge that before we talk about the now what. Why is that important? Because we can't do the now what until we acknowledge what's the problem. And the problem at the end of the day is that we need to become more anti-racist. We need to begin to look at young people as vital to our future. We are inflicting trauma on Black youth during play. Just think about that. And so in order to do the now what, or what are the next steps, we need to focus on individuals. What can individuals do? What can organizations do? And what can communities do? So I call this a 3-step process. So let's start with the first step. Individuals. And this is the hardest step because individuals don't like to know when they're wrong. Let's be honest. We don't like to acknowledge when there's a problem. So to do that, we need to first look at our own biases. For people of color, we are told what our biases is for the majority of time because we are in the minority group. But the majority just doesn't look at their biases. So number one in your step is you have to have awareness of your biases. You need to acknowledge that you may be anti-racist. Anti-racist, you may be racist. A lot of people don't recognize that all of us have biases. And those biases can be overt. And that's what we usually see sometimes when we're talking about overt biases. The Ku Klux Klan being able to yell out the word nigger, being able to say, go back home. That's very overt. But it's the implicit biases. It's the things that are in our heads that we think unconsciously and we act. And everybody has those biases. Stop denying it. We do. You have to have that awareness of those biases and then actually actively go out to try to acquire knowledge about different cultures. So once you are aware of your biases, then you have to go out and acquire knowledge. But it shouldn't end there because that's what we usually do. We go out and we go read a book, or we go out and we do this diversity training at work. You know what I'm talking about. Those diversity trainings. And then we're like, yes.
But then it stops.
Culture. Huh?
But then it stops.
Yeah.
We just stop. And we don't necessarily acquire what is the third step is the skills. How do you begin to interact with other groups? How many times will you put yourself where you're the minority? How many times will you understand how to deal with conflict resolution? It's those skills that become important. And it's not until you have that awareness, that knowledge, those skills, that you can begin to change attitudes. And that's where it becomes important, Deb and Lisa, is to think about those attitudes. We've had anti-discrimination laws in place for decades. We've dealt with the knowledge. People know it's wrong. We've dealt with a few of the skills, but we haven't been able to change the attitudes. And those attitudes reflect the behavior. And so that to me is the first step at the individual level is you need to address yourself. And here I may get a little controversial. It's majority whites. You need to go through this process.
Yes, Corliss, I have to tell you, I say this all the time in my courses. It's important that we recognize that everyone holds implicit bias, right?
Exactly.
Everybody does. Everybody does. You can't say, oh, I'm not racist. Everybody has implicit bias. Maybe it's because of experiences you had when you were younger. Maybe it was the boys beat up on you. So as a female teacher in a classroom,
Exactly.
you don't like that roughhousing, or you don't like that interaction because maybe you had a bad experience. I get that, right? But you got to recognize that that's a bias that comes from you.
Exactly.
And it's impacting the children that you're working with. And so I think that is such a, I do this, you were saying being controversial, I do this activity where we talk about culture, we talk about the importance of culture, we talk about how culture isn't necessarily tied to your ethnicity or race, that I have people stand up and we do non-threatening sorts of questions, and I have them stand up and sit down, during those questions. So to demonstrate, it has nothing to do with ethnicity or race. It has to do with your experience and your culture. And
how you were socialized.
Yes, exactly. And again, to be full disclosure, I grew up in South Texas, And the first Black person I ever saw, I was 14. And my mom, I went over to them and said, "Your skin is beautiful," because I'm white and burn at, if the sun looks at me. And my mom's like, "Deborah Lee, get over here. What are you doing?" And I'm like, "No, no, no, no. I love this skin." And so we talked and became good friends, right? Because of the, and was that culturally sensitive or racially sensitive of me? No, but I was 14. And 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 so I think that this, and so my environment, even though I love my parents and they were wonderful, they were very racist.
I do understand. I do. And that's the thing, is that at least you recognize that. There are so many people who know their family, their friends, their associates are racist and have been discriminatory. Racism, and before I go back, I'm going to go back to that. Remind me about racism and power. But that ability, and that's what I mean by skills, to confront that. So you're aware, you have knowledge that you know it's wrong, but you don't have the skills to confront it, which is why it keeps going. That's the problem, is that we will not confront what is right in front of us. And so when we talk about that racism, now I'm going back to that point that threw in my head, it's about power as well as privilege. And a lot of people are like, "I don't have race, I'm not racist. I have Black friends." That doesn't mean you're not racist. That has nothing to do with it. And 9 times out of 10, when you say I have Black friends, it's because you don't even see that person. You don't recognize the privilege you have to erase the color off of that person in your presence, but not realizing when they come around your family, they're getting talked about. And you do. When they go out and have interactions with the police or in the store, you may not see it, but everybody else sees it. And because you're not confronting it, guess what?
You're part of it.
There's still an issue there. Exactly. Lisa, it's amazing how a lot of times when we have this discussion around race, how many individuals, especially white individuals, will say, "But I grew up poor." But you didn't grow up poor, and
right.
That poorness is based off of the color of your skin. Well, I had to pull myself up from the bootstraps, and I didn't get in school because of special things. Guess what? We didn't either. We had to prove our ability 100% plus. And when it comes to youth, research is showing us that those biases that you were talking about, Deb, are having a big impact, not only in the classrooms, but outside of school as well. There's research that's showing that teachers are seeing young boys as early as kindergarten and first grade as older than what they truly are. They are sexualizing Black girls at a much younger age, and that they don't need care or they don't need empathy because they're strong Black girls. They're still a girl. They're still young. And for you to say they don't need care shows your biases. And this was a nationwide study that was done. One of the co-authors is Jamelia Blake, who was at Texas A&M. And there have been other studies that have looked at the same thing. And so those biases are ingrained within our society. So for us to think that there's inequity in education, there's research that's showing there's inequity in the healthcare. Recent study just came out last week that talked about the fact that young Black babies are more likely to die with white doctors as their caregiver compared to white babies. Think about that. So if it's happening in these sectors of our society, why would we not think it's happening in play?
And Corliss, I was a director, I was a teacher for years. I was a director of early care and education programs. And when I do professional development sessions, sometimes you have to make them see it, right? They have to see that
Yes.
implicit bias.
Right.
And so one of those controversial things that I do when other professors are walking down the hall and they look at me and go, I can't believe you just did that, is I put up chart paper in the hallway and I put up stereotypes.
I do that exercise.
Yeah, I love it. See, we're so on the same page, right? And,
Yes.
you know, I don't go into, and because I'm not quite ready yet, that's my thing. I do a redhead, a blonde, a used car salesman, um, a single mom,
Right.
and then on the other side of the hallway, it's a single dad. And I do, let's see, a single mom, a 50-year-old driving a sports car. And before we go out in the hallway, I say to them, and we've done this culture, we've talked about, I haven't gotten to the implicit bias yet, but we've talked about culture. And I say, so each of us has these things that are rooted from our culture, our experiences. And we heard people talk about this, or we may have experienced this. So what I want you to do is not filter. Do not filter anything you write down on these pieces of paper. I want you to go out and the very first thing that pops into your head, I want you to write it down. And they're out in the hallway going, oh my God, I can't believe I just did that. I, I'm embarrassed. And people are like, oh my God, where did that come from? And then we go back in and talk about it. And that's when I introduce implicit bias. So it is, but people, I can't tell them they have implicit bias. I have to show them, right? I have to
Well, and
experience
something
it.
unique, I think, to the early childhood sector is that we attract very caring, loving people to be preschool teachers and family child care providers. And I think what comes with that is that disposition of caring and niceness, but also comes wanting to avoid the topic at hand because I don't want to rock the boat. And so just even having direct conversations makes everybody uncomfortable, so they get stuck there like, oh no, and so we dance around it without realizing that the topic at hand needs to be dealt with head on, still affectionately, still appropriately, but dancing around it is making it worse.
Exactly. So I will tell you, Deb, I take that exercise a step further.
Oh yeah, so that's what I wanted to hear.
Yeah, I don't use the redhead. I don't use the 50-year-old in the sports car. I actually put the minority census categories up on the wall and say, what do you know? And what have you heard about African American youth, Asian American youth, Indian or Native American youth, Hispanic youth? And I get stereotypes and everything that they can think of. From I've heard Hispanics are lazy and they take up all the jobs, all the way to Blacks are gangs and threatening. I get it all. But then we come back into the classroom, same thing. I was like excited. We come back into the classroom and not only do we talk about the biases, we take it a step further and go out toward the community and our social systems to talk about, well, where did this come from?
Hollywood.
Right, and so we have to talk about the media, we have to talk about parents, and they say, well, you know, I think all illegal immigrants shouldn't be in this community, need to come the right way. So, okay, so let's start there. What's the right way and what is illegal? Is a person illegal or is the act illegal? So are they truly illegal or did they? So we have to have those discussions to truly break down what they're talking about, because 9 times out of 10, they don't have the stats to back it up. So you can't say Hispanics, immigrants are lazy, but then they're also taking all the jobs. That's a contradiction. They can't be lazy and take the jobs. So you have to think about those things a little clearer. And so that's when they start realizing, oh, there's more to this. But I also take it a step further and allow them to ask me anything. What is the difference between terms nigger versus nigga? Why can you say it and we can't say it? Or what are differences in terms around XYZ and black on black crime? I said, but you do understand the rates of white on white crime are just as high. People commit crimes where they live, and most of us live in segregated communities.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it becomes really important to have these discussions, because we're talking about what's going on at an individual level. It's only when you go beyond those stereotypes or you go beyond those issues where you get to talk about organizations, as well as looking at things such as policy and communities. And that becomes even more important because organizations really believe they're non-biased.
Oh boy.
Statements to say they're discriminatory free, and they're like, yes. And every single one of their policies and practices don't necessarily adhere to those ideologies or those values that they espouse.
It's like
so
it's
the second thing is to look at those organizations as well.
exactly. And it's like so when I first started at my community college, we have I am fortunate that we have a very diverse community. And so it is wonderful to have different perspectives come into the classroom. And it's not always ethnicity. It can be ages as well, right? And genders.
Exactly.
It's lovely.
Yes.
And the
Abilities.
first, yeah, exactly. So here I am brand new in this college, and the very first class I taught, people walked in the door, really wonderful, diverse group of people. People of one color sat at these tables. People of another color sat at these tables. And the first thing I said was, look around this room and tell me what's wrong.
Yeah.
And it took them 20 minutes. I hadn't even introduced myself. It took them 20 minutes to say, what's wrong? I don't see anything. What's wrong? Is that light out? Is that what's wrong? They had no idea. And I said, look at the color of the skin of the folks you're sitting with and fix it. And they, they didn't even know my name yet. But they fixed it. And that's where how we talked yesterday in one of the Porch Play Chats of where you sit is where you feel comfortable. So you stay in the same place all the time. And so they stayed in those same places. And it was at the end of the semester when we were doing evaluations. I always do one versus the course evaluations. I do a different one. And they said, thank you for making us sit with other people.
Yeah. And I will add to that, it is where you feel comfortable, but for a lot of youth of color, it's also for protection. It's also for protection. They've been in way more spaces where they have to protect themselves because of white nationalism, white supremacy, and discriminatory practices. It does become hard. And so you gravitate toward people who are like you. And so it is about being comfortable, but in some cases it is also about being around people to protect yourself as a defense mechanism.
And that I felt a little guilty about that because they didn't feel safe yet, right? And I certainly didn't make them feel safe, but I was.
But you make them aware, Deb, and that is still important because the only way to bridge that gap and change those attitudes that I was talking about earlier is to begin to cultivate friendships within the peers so that they get to know people on a different level. And so not a critique at all, believe me, but it's one of those things to also think about even when you see kids playing together on the playground where they may be in certain groups. So take this book, or Why Are All the Kids Sitting on One Side of the Cafeteria? She talks about that in that book and exactly these issues. It's about being comfortable, but for some people it's about being a form of protection. Definitely.
So I hear that and I honor that. And I think it's the same way for people who are white or people who are Hispanic, right? I think it's in each one of those different ethnicity groups or race groups. But it is something that we have to get them out of their comfort zone with. So, Corliss, this has been amazing. Thank you.
Oh no.
And
Are
I
we already
apologize.
out of time?
I know, it goes so fast.
My internet crashed, so sorry that I backed out there for a
No.
second.
But
No, you're fine.
Corliss, what I'd like you to do, and I know that I'm sure you have a wealth of resources, could you send a list of books that teachers could read to children?
Oh, yes. Yes.
And I would put that, and then of course, you know, people may go, oh my God, I do need to gain more knowledge. So what are some good books or some good articles that they could look up? So we're always trying to give our viewers ways to deepen their understanding of the topic. And since this one is so needed, reading books to children, because you know, if they read books, then they take on, hopefully they're good books. And I have a great, do you have that great anti-bias website that I make them do book evals based on all the descriptors in this website?
Tolerance.org? Which one are you thinking?
I don't know if it's tolerance.org. I'll send it to you, and then we can have a chat.
No problem. And I do have
afterwards.
several lists. I've been keeping a database of all the different lists since George Floyd's death.
Wonderful.
As well as since Tamir Rice's death, which I make sure we understand, it was while he was playing.
Yeah.
It was while he was playing. And so I do believe I can provide resources, but I also, before we leave, Deb and Lisa, I don't want to not focus on organizations. Organizations have to do better. They have to begin looking at their policies and their practices within their organization, their staff hiring. How are they training their staff? And then also looking at how are you as an organization in a community, but not interacting with the community. So we have to begin looking at what's the point of calling yourself a community organization, but you have no clue about the community, nor does anyone from the community actually work in your organization. Everybody comes in from somewhere else.
Yeah.
So I know I'm preaching to the choir, but this is not only community organizations, this is in our schools as well.
Oh, absolutely.
In the community.
And I think
I know I'm gonna go. These are
no. And I think what is, I mean, I have stories that I talk about.
Have you back.
Yes, absolutely. I have stories that I talk about in my classes of field experiences where I've gone out and observed in classrooms where the entire class was children of color and every teacher was white.
Yes.
And all I heard was yelling of teachers at children. And and I talk about those experiences and I say, why is that? What?
Because it's a lack of cultural competency. They are trying to teach in social settings based on stereotypes.
Yes.
And not understand, which is very different when a teacher of color comes in, the students respect them in a totally different way.
Yes.
So, but it's also, we've allowed these organizations to go into communities to not only design play spaces, design our schools and manage them that exclude people. And we can have a whole nother conversation on adults designing playgrounds for kids, which is why most of the kids don't even play on the playground.
Exactly.
That's not what they want.
So we're gonna come back to that. So we want another Porch Play Chat.
So think about if we design places for kids and with no kid input, how can you design programs and services for youth of color, particularly Black youth, and you have no one Black or even a youth in your management, in your design, on your boards, in your office as staff? And we're not talking the custodians.
No. Oh my goodness. Exactly. And so
That's
again,
a privilege. See, I'm sorry. I had to.
no.
Sorry.
These are just additional Porch Play Chats. So I want you to
actually,
write down that
I
title
was
and
just gonna
send it
say,
to me.
Corliss, it's like you're having an audition and you didn't even realize it. I'm making this is like she's coming back. We're giving you the ticket. You're coming back.
You're
I
not
would
getting out
love
of
to
us.
come back to
We would
have these
love to
discussions.
have you. So I'm going to wrap us up for today. You're going to send me
Wrap it up for
resources.
us.
And so what I want folks to know is that to learn more about Porch Play Chats, go to IPA-USA.org. Up in the little top right hand corner is our Facebook page link, which is where these Porch Play Chats will be viewed. Our YouTube page where you can just click on it and go straight to them. And then on our website, we have a blog, and which, Corliss, you're welcome to join in on. We have a blog, and it's called PlayTalk. And so we would love you to kind of get involved in that.
I would love
And
to.
yes, and that's where I introduce the Porch Play Chats as they're being released on Mondays. So I thank you so much. Keep playing, and thanks for joining us.
It was nice to meet
Bye,
you.
you guys.
Thank you.
Nice meeting you.
You too.
Corliss, don't leave.
Hopefully.